Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we're continuing our conversation on talking to teens, and we're going to talk about what does it look like to follow Jesus with our tech. This was a whole thing. I wrote out this way too extravagant outline, and it may be useful one day, but it wasn't for this conversation. It was massive, and this conversation doesn't need to be. This conversation can be so simple. We are simply talking about how do we use all the tech that makes us look more like Jesus and none of the tech that doesn't. There is tech that definitely builds us up and improves our lives and equips us to do God's work. And there's tech that when we have an honest moment in prayer and worship, we go, I don't really like who I am with that tech. I don't like who I've become around it. I don't like what it does to my heart, my motivations. I don't like the people that I like when I'm in these spaces. Like for it can be any number of tech, but there's a definite answer. And at the end of this conversation, there's going to be a tech that you probably need to step away from. And I'm not going to ask you to make some kind of like, I would never for the rest of my life. I am going to ask you to take a specific set of time, prayerfully set that goal, and then step into it and see what the Lord has for you. Because well, as we'll learn today, faith is a verb. It's not just an idea. Faith is something we do, and we want to follow the Lord even in our technology. So our verse for today, let's start there. Hebrews 12 says, therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let's rid ourselves of every obstacle and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let's run with endurance the race that is set out for us, looking only at Jesus, the originator and perfecter of the faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. This is Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. This is a beautiful picture and reminder that the work we do here is not simply set on us being good enough or impressing God, but instead has something to do with faith. We are actively taking action because of what we believe, and faith, recognizing that it's not because of our work that we are somehow saved. We can go back to Ephesians 2, 1 through 10, recognizing that we are sinners, saved by grace for good works. That is what we're encompassing in this conversation today. And I picked this verse. This is heavy on my heart because I love that piece. It says, let us rid ourselves of every obstacle and the sin which so easily entangles us. Sometimes technology becomes sinful, either because it's morally wrong. It, by engaging it, causes us to engage in parts of ourselves that God asks us to set down at the cross. This might be as deliberate as, in fact, let's do this. Let's go Galatians 5 is our next piece for this. So if you go Galatians 5, 19 through 21, I love this because it can feel so hard to know, like, what is God's will online? Like, we get especially when we hit college, we're like, what is real? And this sets it beautifully for our hearts, exposing to the light what our hearts are doing in digital spaces where people may not know and be able to call us on it. But God knows. And he very gently and lovingly says, that's bad for you. Set it down. Trust me. Let's read 5:19. This is Galatians 5:19. Now, the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are sexual immorality, impurity, indecent behavior, idolatry, witchcraft, hostilities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. That's a big list. There are websites built entirely around almost every single one of those, celebrating all forms of impurities of, if you look at right action scripturally of what is God's character and what reflects God's character, impurity would be the opposite of that. When we have dissension, there's entire websites, political dissension, racial dissension, ideological dissension. I'm going to go find an echo chamber with people who only think like me, and I want to surround myself with them and never have to deal with conflict and confrontation and being out there with those people. It's dissension. It's us versus them. They're really the problem. We know scripturally that's not true. We know that our battle is not against flesh and blood. We know that it's actually spiritual warfare that God has won, and we're living in the already. It's been won, and we are indwelled by his spirit. but not yet. Bad stuff still happens, and this world is not currently operating according to God's will. There's a reason he will establish a new kingdom. His kingdom will come finally and perfectly, and a new heaven and earth, because this one is broken and he's going to make all the bad things untrue. It's going to happen. It just hasn't been done yet in our timeline. We then see things like jealousy. Entire websites, Instagram is built around making us jealous and discontent with our own lives so that we'll spend more time in other people's. Outbursts of anger. If you go on YouTube, you can find entire playlists with millions and millions and millions of compiled views of people just raging at all sorts of things. Traffic, video games, family members, Halloween candy. Like it's a thing, and sometimes we think it's funny and sometimes we think it's sad, but we keep watching. We're celebrating it with our focus. Selfish ambition is celebrated. The grind nation mentality of like, I got to go build my brand and my kingdom. And this is part of what's crushing young people. Sometimes as adults, we go, teenagers, they don't have work ethic. They don't, back in my day. But adults, we need to understand, young people know that they are building a brand from the age of whenever they enter the internet or their friends enter the internet, really. Any age they can begin showing up in someone else's posts, their brand has started. That's an incredible amount of weight to carry around, to believe that you must establish yourself with your own ambition. By your might, build your kingdom, because it's going to follow. We talk so much about digital footprints, about your online citizenship, about you can never make it go away. And we're trying to motivate them to make good decisions. And often all we do is crush them under the, you must actualize yourself. Your future depends on you being the captain of your ship and the master of your fate, which isn't scriptural. That's not what Jesus tells us. Instead, he says, trust and follow me. He just tells us that he's our good shepherd. He tells us that his load is easy and his burden is light, that his yoke is easy, that we can bind ourselves to him and do his work with him, not on our strength and earning his favor, trying to be ambitious for our own ends. Even if, God, I'm going to impress you with how good I share the gospel. That is personal ambition. It's beautifully mounted on a wonderful desire, but we need to repent of our part of that. And I want to tell you, as someone whose full-time job is sharing the gospel in front of people, it is desirous. It's something I want to do well. I want to go out and yes, people hear the gospel and turn to the Lord. I want that to happen. And even in large numbers, that'd be great too. And yet, that's not actually what I'm called to. I'm called to faithfully do the work set before me. Maybe one person, maybe 100 people, maybe way more. I'm not promised a number. I'm promised an opportunity to be part of the kingdom work because of what God's done in my heart, to help others see God do that in their hearts. That's what I want, not selfish ambition. Idolatry, witchcraft, hostility, strife, outbursts of anger. I've already did that. There we go. Dissension, faction, envy, drunkenness, carousing. And we didn't even, sexual immorality. I skipped right past it, but I think we understand that some of the internet has that. I believe the last number I saw that was an actual real number was something like 1 in 20 websites is built around lust. It's specifically pornography, as we would define it today, pornography, not as Jesus defines it. Jesus defines it as a heart thing, not whether or not they happen to be wearing clothes, and maybe a conversation for another day. But a huge portion of the internet and the content of the internet and the viewing time of the internet goes towards sexual immorality and impurity. Envy, drunkenness, carousing, all of these things are celebrated either as jokes or as actual real life goals, become part of our culture, become part of our language, become part of the way we communicate to one another and the way we live our lives. And we are told that is not fruit of the Spirit. That was a lot of words to get there, but I want to make sure that we are being deliberate with this, because when we think about how should I use my tech and the sin that so easily entangles, we have a really good example of that. We could begin going through and going, wow, does this entangle me in lust? Does this entangle me in dissension? I was thinking I was being an informed citizen, but am I actually just getting angry? Ask yourself that question when you read that news feed. Is it empowering you and inspiring you to drop to your knees and pray to the Lord on behalf of these broken and hurting souls, those committing the atrocities and those receiving them? Or do you just get bitter and mad and dissentious? Do you start running to your favorite social media platform and blasting people that believe otherwise? Right? There's absolutely a place to take a strong stand for a good cause. Please do that. But you should never have to dehumanize the other side to do that. Jesus didn't. If anything, he gave incredible humanity to the very people who were murdering him, to Pilate, to a conversation of offering him when he says, "Are you God?" And he says, "Are you asking me?" Or is this because someone told you, right? Telling him that I am the truth. And Pilate's response is, "What's truth?" Right? That he could have pulled that thread. Pilate could have had a conversation there. Just like Felix later will have one when talking with, who am I thinking of? Paul. Had to do some math there. But we see this idea that there is truth that we are to pursue in light of Christ digitally. Galatians 5:19 through 21 shows us some of the fruit that if it's bearing it, this is things that are entangling us. So that's our big picture, that there is technology that some of us need to step away from. Here's just two examples. At a high school junior, I spoke at a high school this year. High school junior sent me this note. This is a quote from a DM she sent. It says, "I was thinking about what kinds of tech I've been using too much, and Instagram is a big issue for me. I spend hours a day just scrolling, and I know it's a waste of my time. I'd like to get rid of Instagram, at least until I build better habits. But I do talk to important people and call and text through Instagram because I have an Apple phone and they have Samsung." So meaning it's better for messaging and it's easier to catch them, and they can both use Wi-Fi to do that. I wanted to ask if you know of any apps or options. So we talked a little bit about, here's some options that could fit what you're looking for. So diverse on the number of things you can do. She wrote me back 6 weeks later. "Hey, Nathan," which, by the way, love it. First name. I'm not Mr. Sutherland because I'm not a teacher anymore. It was a cool moment. I was like, oh yeah, people use my first name now. "Hey, Nathan, sorry I never got back to you. I ended up deactivating my Instagram and I wasn't sure how to tell you how things are going. It's been over a month without any social media, and it's been capital S-O. So great. I found I recognize quickly when I open my phone just to waste time. And I've gotten back a lot of time I really needed. I'm a musician, so I was losing many practice hours and falling behind on a lot of my pieces. And with the holidays just around the corner, this was December that she sent me this note, I had loads of performances. I'm able to say I did really well at my performance because I had the time to practice." Skipping to the end, "My Instagram usage went from an average of 4 hours a day to 1 hour a day." And she said she got rid of Instagram as apps and Facebook, but would use the browser. And she limited herself to 1 hour a day, gaining 75% of her time back. I love this because it's not just get rid of Instagram so that God will love you more. No, she goes, "Man, I have passions, I have gifts, I have talents, I have things I want to accomplish, and this isn't helping me. I can see how I'm getting entangled." And she went on elsewhere to say this was impacting her relationship with people that were her friends and people that weren't her friends, her personal thoughts about herself, and how she processed her relationship with God, which can be hard to do when you constantly feel like you're out of time and you get anxious. And how does she handle her anxiety? She went to social media. For me, this was me in video games. Video games, I played good games. They were well made. They were morally appropriate. I'd be okay if my kids ran across them. And yet, I turned to them to celebrate my highest highs and to run away from my lowest lows. Having a summer break or a project that went really well, I've earned this. This is my reward to myself. And when my day would torpedo and I didn't follow through on what I needed to do, or life just happened, I had a fight with my wife or something tragic occurred in real life, video games are where I went to be okay. So we know it can happen with video games. We know it can happen with social media. Here's a young man, 20-year-old. He is a young college student, and he was talking with me and said, "I just deleted social media off my phone." I assumed I knew why, but the rhetorical question was asked, "Oh, why did you do that?" And his response was, "My friends and I don't know how to tell stories." I was like, I actually don't know what you mean by that. So real question now, what do you mean? And he said, the short version was what he said at the very end, which is, "We've spent so much time living in other people's lives, we haven't been living our own." And just like the other girl, he deleted social media. He's giving himself the chance to follow up with friends. He set himself very specific times when he can go and do that through a browser. Through a browser means like he's using Safari or Chrome rather than using the app. It's much less sticky of an experience. The feed isn't as good. You kind of can just go to your messages and check things out and then shut it down and walk away. And it's so clunky to get back to. You can't really do it passively. Just don't leave the browser open on just that page, right? Like close it down every time, make it something you have to do deliberately. And then it kind of stays in its place just because it's not so accessible and you can't do it without thinking. And his point was, I want to get better at telling the story of my life, and I have to have a life to tell about, not just the things I saw other people doing online. And he's like, he's like, even when I have something good happen right now, I can't communicate it more than 2 or 3 minutes. It's like, I'll get really excited about something cool I did, and I'll sit down with a friend, and then I'll realize I don't have any words because I just have no practice telling my own story. We are story beings. We are created for story. It's one of the things that sets humans apart from all the other critters, is that we are made in God's image and likeness. Jesus is the Word, the spoken word of God, and that there is spoken word to communicate story and meaning is a major part of how humans work, how we are designed in God's likeness and what we are called to do. We sing God's praises, we recount God's stories and set up our Ebenezers that remind us of his promises and fulfillments, and we create stories ourselves. Sometimes just for fun, fictional ones, okay, but also stories about the life that we live, and we call those testimonies. When we tell how God has worked in our life, it's a testament to his work. It's God's story in our lives. Those are important things to do, and that's why one young man gave up his tech. How do we do this then well? And I mentioned this is the short, condensed version. We're there. We know we are called in Hebrews 12, 1-2, to set aside all the sin that so easily entangles us, and we know how to look for it, the fruits of the Spirit. But where should we look for it? How can we condense it? I would encourage you to use the RESET. It's the acronym I made to look at our tech and say, where is my technology hurting my relationships and responsibilities? Just look at your family and your friends for your relationships. Just look at your commitments, anywhere you're saying, like a sports team, and your, I guess they're both commitments, your commitments for outside of work, and then your work commitments, be those schoolwork or paid work, something you're doing to fulfill part of the purpose you feel called to do, and then part of the way you're spending your discretional time. It can be friends, it could be, as I mentioned before, sports, it could be volunteering, it could be whatever your commitments are. But is it hurting those? Your emotions. Basically, do you need this technology to be okay? It's called coping. It's okay. We all do it. All right. Mine is chocolate chip cookies because I don't have video games anymore. But I know when I'm doing that, I'm like, ooh, that wasn't just because I enjoy the taste of a cookie. Like I did that because I was anxious. Like I did that because I was stressed. I did that because I just feel overwhelmed and I just need to I need to do this. Or I ride my bike. Something wonderful and healthy. Oftentimes it's a way to recalibrate. And sometimes I'm running to my bike to get away from having to deal with the stuff God set before me and told me to trust him with. And I have to actively trust him. Like get on my knees and go, Lord, I trust you with this, but I don't feel it. Like help me with this. That's our emotions. Do we need this thing to be okay? Or are we okay without it and we just happen to enjoy this thing? Sleep. Can we get good, solid sleep? Or are we needing this technology or disrupting our sleep with it? Enjoyment. Does it make everything else wilt? And this is the only thing we can really do to have fun now, and time. Can we be content using it through our browser, however often we've set for ourselves, 30 minutes, Tuesdays and Thursdays? That's enough time to catch up with our friends and get back to our DMs and know the cool dance moves, and then to move on with our lives and not burn 4 hours of time that should have been used extending the gifts God's given us. So we use our reset and we go, all right, where in this reset am I seeing that Galatians 5:19-21 fruit? Maybe it's my music practice. Maybe it's my ability to tell stories. Maybe it's my, emotional well-being, like I saw in my own life that I needed to take a step back. That's number one. You need to find someone who loves you and tell them what that thing is. And my challenge to you, the time I'd mentioned at the very beginning, is to take 30 days. Actually delete the app. Maybe put up parental controls. I had a young man who's a junior in college, going into his senior year actually. And he said, you know what? I'm going to delete all social media off my phone, including for him email, which isn't typical for young people to deal with distracting email, but this is a very driven young man. And he's like, I'm only going to check it through browsers or through a desktop, like my work computer. For him, it's school computer. But I'm not going to have it on me. I'm not going to be able to check it when I'm just sitting with my family. It's like, I want to be more deliberate on being present. He's picking up the practice. For him, it's audiobooks is something he's going to add, but he's removing these things that don't build up who he wants to become, who he feels called to become, and the purpose God set before him. I love that. Give yourself 30 days. Then the second part, of, all right, if I'm going to remove this thing for 30 days, what I'm going to add back, I mentioned already that senior in college is going to add audiobooks. He's got an intentional list. He went and asked 3 adults who are well-read, and he said, hey, what should I be engaging in? What are some thinkers and people, some of them believers, but just ideas that I should begin mulling over as a fresh young adult in the wide world? Such a cool way to do it. And Audible's a wonderful way. And if you, as a young person, can't afford Audible, I'm 100% sure if you go with that first one to a loving adult and say, hey, I want to stop this negative habit and I need something to do with some of that time. When I go and riding in my car, or if I'm in the space, I want to be able to pick up something edifying that still engages my brain. Could you help me with an audiobook subscription? Can we go half-seas? Can I pay $5 and you pay $10? Like, I'm pretty sure there's a grandparent or an adult or a caring teacher. Like, there's someone out there that wants to help you with that. So keep that in mind. It's something to add. It's something to remove. And then it's this conversation on how do we be deliberate in walking in this way? And this is the part that it might be too much. So bear with me. Maybe just pause the conversation here. We have how we're going to remove. We're going to have something we're going to add. But I wanted to give you some ideas on what to add because it felt kind of ethereal. Like, good idea. No one's going to argue with it, but what do we do? John Mark Comer in his book, Practicing the Way, gives us a bunch of examples of things we can add that would be called spiritual disciplines historically. But here's some examples. 3 external things we can do. We can go out to do them. 3 internal things we can add for personal edification. We can pick them as they go, but the whole point is to look more like Jesus by practicing that. Again, faith in action. It could be things like service, giving of our time and our talents. Find something you're equipped to do. For me, that was serving in Young Life when I was in middle school. I'm going to go out and just be a part of this, help share the gospel by hanging out with kids, which is something I'm passionate about. It could be giving, generosity, giving your treasure financially, or using your treasure to engage people relationally. Maybe it's host a meal. Make some food with friends. College kids, I'm looking at you. Food is a huge deal, and it takes not a ton of time to make something simple like tacos, and it's a big deal. To get a meal that's home cooked and to get it with people. Invite some friends over, make the food together, and then just hang out. And if Bible study is part of it, awesome. If scripture is part of it, great. But at least get to know these people and what makes them tick and why. And there are those little Greg Koukl tactics things where you're putting pebbles in people's shoes, asking them, why do you believe that? Where does that come from? How does that look? Honestly, not as a way to trap them, not as a way to win converts. That is not scriptural, but to raise disciples. You're helping people think about, what are you following? You're already following someone, right? You're following something with your life and with your actions. Who are you following and why? So that's service, giving, and then worship, corporate worship, actual singing the words of truth to God and about God to remind our hearts. It's a beautiful practice. Internal would be reading scripture. So that'd be like a classic quiet time. Take 5 minutes, take 15 minutes, take an hour, but make time each day. Sabbath and solitude. Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments that I struggle most with. I go, I'm supposed to take a 7th of my week and not be personally productive in the terms of like my schedule and my goals and my things, but be spiritually productive and spiritually present. And then another one is fasting, physical food fasting, not just giving up social media for a month. That's food fasting. That's going to draw out in your flesh the things that you might not have even known were there until you get hungry enough to see them. And you can start with just one meal, just from dinner, skip breakfast the next day, make it till lunch. And then maybe make it till dinner, and then maybe make it a full day. It's not a competition. You're not impressing anybody. Don't go around with sackcloth and ashes and tell people about how hungry you are because you love God. Instead, it's a way to see if it triggers you. Some of us are only good with our tech as long as we're well fed. And as again, in his book, he points it out, but I've seen it in my own life. Like, you think you're doing good with your thought life? Go without food for a little bit. See what happens next. Go without food and then get into a quiet place. See what overwhelms your brain. There's a good chance that some of those fleshy bits of us are only staying in the background because we're tamping them down with all the cookies of life, and they just don't have to rise to the surface. We want to trust God even in those moments. It's not us being weak. It's us being faithful. We are trusting God to be better even than the things that we use to control our own selves, because he can kill our sin rather than just manage it. Amazing. So that's my challenge for us today. Following Jesus in a tech world, looking to the author of our faith who ran the race before us and gives us the strength to run our own race, to set aside the sin that so easily entangles us, looking at our reset, looking at Galatians 5:19 through 21, and then using all the tech and all the spiritual disciplines that help us look more like Jesus. I hope this is encouraging and that it gives you something to do and to think about as young people who are following Jesus. You don't have Jesus 0.5 and get 1.0 when you're somehow, 21 or a parent or a college graduate. Like, you've got this in upper elementary. You love Jesus and follow him, you can do these things. You're in middle school, you can do these things. High school and college, you can do these things. And the doing matters not because it proves you love God, but you love God. And now these things help us look more like Jesus. And they help us push back against the parts of us that rise up and say, you could be your own God. And we say, no, I put that to death in Jesus, and now I'm going to act it out. Now I'm walking in the freedom God's already given me, and I want to see that for myself. It's how we put to death habitual sin, how we form healthy pathways and build disciplines that are strong and resilient. When those times of trial come, we know how to follow our good shepherd. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, Nathan@gospeltech.net. If you want more resources, you can check us out on Facebook at Love God Use Tech, or on Instagram. And did I say Facebook? I meant YouTube at Love God Use Tech. It can be a little tricky, but if you just Google Nathan Sutherland Gospel Tech, or if you YouTube that, I will pop up. We just don't have enough subscribers yet to show up high, but we're on regular Google searches. It'll pop up right there on the first page. And then Instagram, Facebook, same at Love God Use Tech. And then join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.